Story 1. I'd been looking forward to staying at Jake's new place all week. His family had just moved to the neighborhood, and this would be our first sleepover since elementary school. Mom dropped me off around 7 p.m., and I walked up to the two-story house at the address Jake had texted me, 1437 Oakwood Lane. The porch light cast a warm glow, but nobody answered when I knocked. I tried again, a bit louder this time, but still nothing. The door wasn't fully latched, so I pushed it open a crack. "Jake?" I called out hesitantly, stepping inside. The air in the foyer felt heavy, still, like the house hadn't been truly lived in yet. But it wasn't just the emptiness, it was the style. The muted gray walls and minimalist decor were nothing like the brightly colored, slightly chaotic vibe of Jake's Instagram posts. The scent of potpourri hung in the air, a far cry from the pizza and video game aroma I'd expected. "Hello?" I called again, moving further into the living room. A large abstract painting hung over the fireplace, a piece that definitely hadn't been in any of Jake's photos. Maybe I really did have the wrong house. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling slightly as I double-checked the address. That's when I heard the distinct creak of a floorboard upstairs, followed by heavier footsteps. Before I could back out the door, a man I'd never seen before appeared at the top of the stairs. He was tall and gaunt, with a shock of thinning brown hair. His eyes widened in surprise, mirroring my own shock. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice rough as he came down the steps two at a time. There was a tightness in his jaw, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes that made my stomach clench. "I'm looking for Jake," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "I thought this was his house." The man's expression darkened, his eyebrows furrowing. "There's no Jake here. How did you get in?" He took another step closer, and I noticed a faint, almost chemical smell clinging to him. "The door was unlocked," I said, backing slowly toward the exit, my hand reaching for the doorknob. "I'm really sorry." The man lunged forward with surprising speed, his hand clamping around my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong, his fingernails digging into my skin. "You're not going anywhere until the cops get here," he said, his voice low and menacing as he reached into his back pocket with his free hand, pulling out his phone. That's when my gaze fell on the kitchen counter behind him. A wooden knife block sat there, the slots filled with various sizes of knives except for one, conspicuously empty space near the larger blades. His other hand remained hidden behind his back, and the thought of what it might be holding sent a jolt of pure terror through me. I yanked my arm free with all my strength, the sudden movement surprising him. I bolted out the door and across the porch, running faster than I ever had in my life, my lungs burning. I didn't stop until I was 3 blocks away, my legs shaking, and I could finally gasp out a call to my mom, breathless and terrified. Later, amidst the apologies and reassurances, we learned I'd been at 1437 Oakwood Lane, while Jake lived at 1437 Oakwood Loop, on the completely opposite side of the neighborhood. The police were notified, though they didn't find anything amiss at the house. But I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't noticed that empty knife slot, or if the man's hidden hand had indeed been holding a weapon. Jake and I never did have that sleepover, and to this day, I still get a knot in my stomach whenever I approach a house I'm not completely sure of. Story 2. It was supposed to be a regular sleepover at Chris's house. Video games, junk food, the usual. But even before Chris suggested his game, there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere that night. Chris and his friends, Tyler, Devin, and Marcus, seemed a little too hyped up. Their laughter a bit too loud, their eyes holding a strange, almost manic gleam. Around midnight, after we'd exhausted the latest zombie shooter, Chris suggested we play something called Basement. He explained it was like an extreme version of hide-and-seek in the dark. One person would be it and stay in the basement while everyone else hid. If it found you, you had to stay silent and follow them until everyone was caught. "The twist," Chris said, with a weird, unsettling smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, "is that it has to catch you with their eyes closed." It sounded stupid and honestly a little creepy, but Chris insisted it was intense, and that we had to try it. I felt a knot of unease in my stomach, but the others seemed eager, so I reluctantly went along with it. We drew straws, and of course, I ended up being it. The guys led me down the creaky wooden stairs to the basement. It was mostly unfinished, the air thick with the smell of damp concrete and dust, except for a small, dimly lit rec room in one corner. The rest was a maze of concrete floors, hulking support pillars, and stacks of cardboard storage boxes. "Count to 100 with your eyes closed," Chris instructed, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "Then try to find us. Remember? Eyes closed the whole time." I closed my eyes, the darkness pressing in, and started counting. I heard them scatter immediately, their footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. Some going up the stairs, others darting around the basement, their muffled giggles fading into the silence. When I reached 100, I kept my eyes shut as promised, my arms outstretched like a zombie in a bad movie, and began feeling my way around the cold, uneven floor. The basement was dead silent now, the earlier excitement completely gone. I shuffled forward, bumping into rough cardboard boxes and cold, damp walls. The musty smell of old newspapers filled my nostrils. After what felt like an eternity, I hadn't found anyone. A prickle of annoyance started to form. I was starting to think they'd tricked me and were all upstairs laughing, watching me stumble around in the dark. Then I heard its soft, deliberate breathing right behind me. A shiver ran down my spine. I spun around, my arms flailing. "Got you," I said, my voice a little shaky, grabbing at empty air. More sounds emerged from the darkness, the soft shuffling of feet, a muffled cough that sounded suspiciously like Marcus. They were definitely down here. But now I heard something else. A distinct, unmistakable sound, the sticky, tearing noise of duct tape being pulled from a roll. A cold wave of dread washed over me. "Guys," I called out, my voice laced with sudden, genuine fear, "this isn't funny." Before anyone could answer, something hard and heavy struck me from behind, sending me sprawling forward onto the cold concrete. My head hit the floor with a sickening thud, and stars exploded behind my eyelids. Before I could even think about opening my eyes, rough hands grabbed my arms and pinned them to the ground. Then, the unmistakable scratchy feel of tape being wrapped tightly around my wrists. "What the hell?" I shouted, my eyes flying open despite myself, my heart pounding in my chest like a trapped bird. Chris, Tyler, and Devin stood over me, their faces illuminated by the dim light filtering down the stairs, looking down with expressions I'd never seen before, cold, almost predatory. Marcus was nowhere in sight. "You opened your eyes," Chris said flatly, his voice devoid of any emotion. "You broke the rules." Panic seized me. They slapped more tape over my mouth, the sticky adhesive pulling at my skin. Then, they dragged me roughly across the cold floor. Behind the hulking, dusty furnace, that's when I saw Marcus. He was already bound and gagged, his eyes wide with terror, a dark bruise blooming on his cheek. It was 4 agonizing hours before Chris's parents came home and heard our muffled screams echoing from the basement. By then, the 3 of them had disappeared, leaving us tied up and traumatized. The police found Chris's journal later, filled with disturbingly detailed plans about what they intended to do to us, how this basement game was just the beginning. We were apparently the first in what they hoped would be a series of games. I haven't been in a basement in years, let alone at a sleepover. The memory of that cold, dark space and the chilling betrayal of my friends still haunts my nightmares. Story 3. The first time I spent the night at Kevin's house, I noticed his bedroom window didn't lock properly. It rattled loosely in its frame, and he said it had been broken for months, but his parents never fixed it because their house was in a safe neighborhood. The thought lingered in the back of my mind, a tiny seed of unease. We stayed up late playing video games that night, the glow of the screen casting flickering shadows on the walls. Kevin's parents, a kind but somewhat oblivious couple, went to bed around 11, leaving us to our own devices. Around 2 a.m., the adrenaline from the games finally wore off, and we crashed. Kevin in his bed and me on the floor in a sleeping bag near the problematic window. A few hours later, I was jolted awake by a soft, almost imperceptible scraping sound. My eyes fluttered open, heavy with sleep, and I strained to focus in the dim pre-dawn light filtering through the curtains. That's when I saw it, and the window, the one that didn't lock, was slowly, silently sliding upward. A dark, indistinct figure was beginning to climb inside, their movements fluid and practiced. My blood ran cold. I froze. Every muscle in my body tense, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wanted to scream, to wake Kevin, but a paralyzing terror gripped me, stealing my voice. My breath hitched in my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, feigning sleep, desperately hoping whoever it was would think I was unconscious and leave. But through my tightly closed eyelashes, I couldn't resist peeking. The figure, a man clad in dark, loose-fitting clothes, moved silently across the room, his footsteps making no sound on the carpet. He seemed to ignore us completely, his focus fixed on the bedroom door. He reached it, his hand hovering over the knob for a moment before easing it open with excruciating slowness and disappearing into the dark hallway. I lay there in a state of sheer panic, my ears straining to pick up any sound. I could hear faint, almost ghostly footsteps moving through the house, the creak of a floorboard in the hallway, a soft rustle from downstairs. My mind raced, imagining the worst. After what seemed like an eternity, the footsteps returned, moving with the same eerie silence. The man reappeared in the doorway, something clutched tightly in his hand, a small, rectangular object that I couldn't quite make out in the darkness. He slipped back out the window as quietly as he'd entered, his movements like a shadow in the night, closing the window almost completely behind him. I lay there for a few more breathless moments, listening for any sign of his return. The moment I was sure he was gone, I scrambled up, my limbs stiff and trembling, and shook Kevin awake, frantically whispering what I'd seen. He was groggy and disbelieving at first, but the sheer terror in my voice convinced him. We woke his parents, who were understandably shaken, and immediately called the police. In the morning light, the reality of what had happened sank in. We discovered what had been taken: Kevin's mother's jewelry box from her dresser, some cash from her purse, and oddly, several framed family photographs from the mantelpiece in the living room. But the most disturbing discovery came from the police. They found footprints below the window that matched others they'd been tracking, belonging to a man who had broken into 6 other homes in the area over the past month. In each case, he entered through children's bedroom windows while everyone slept, taking small valuables and, inexplicably, family photos. In 2 homes, he'd even left behind small, antique-looking music boxes on the children's nightstands, as if leaving strange, silent gifts in exchange for the stolen memories. The officer told Kevin's parents that the suspect seemed to be establishing some kind of twisted relationship with the families he targeted, often returning to the same houses multiple times, sometimes weeks later. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. We never did find out if he came back to Kevin's house. The uncertainty hung in the air like a thick fog. Kevin's family, understandably unnerved, moved away 3 weeks later, leaving behind the house with the window that wouldn't lock and the lingering fear of the night visitor. Story 4. My friend Danny lived in an old Victorian house that smelled faintly of dust and old wood, a scent that always felt a little spooky. The best part about sleepovers at his place was the massive attic his parents converted into a game room. It was a wonderland of a space, with a huge, slightly fuzzy TV, the nostalgic glow of vintage arcade machines humming in the corner, and enough floor space for 5 sleeping bags to be spread out comfortably. On this particular weekend, it was just Danny and me. His parents were away for their anniversary, leaving his older brother Mark in charge. Mark was 19 and mostly kept to himself in his room downstairs, emerging only for food and grunts of acknowledgement. Around midnight, after a particularly intense round of air hockey, we heard a distinct thud from directly above us. The noise seemed to come from above the attic, which didn't make any sense, since we were already on the top floor, the slanted roof just above the ceiling. "Probably just squirrels on the roof," Danny said, trying to sound casual, but his eyes darted nervously towards the ceiling. Then we heard it again. Not the frantic scurrying of rodents, but a heavier, more deliberate sound, a distinct footstep, followed by another. It was too rhythmic, too solid to be an animal. "Is there another level up there?" I whispered, my voice barely audible, pointing to a small rectangular door in the corner of the attic ceiling. It was painted the same off-white as the rest of the ceiling, and looked like what I'd always assumed was just access to a cramped, dusty crawlspace, or maybe the roof itself. "No way," Danny said, his voice now tinged with a clear unease. "That's just a crawlspace. Nobody ever goes up there. It's full of old insulation and junk." As if responding to his words, the small door, which had been flush with the ceiling, slowly creaked open an inch, then stopped, suspended in the silence. A sliver of deeper darkness was visible in the gap. We stared at it, frozen, a shared wave of primal fear washing over us. Danny finally found his voice, though it trembled slightly. "Mark? Is that you messing with us?" Silence. No answer came from downstairs or from above. But then, impossibly, the small door opened another inch, the old hinges groaning softly. Without a word, we both scrambled downstairs, our earlier bravado completely gone. We pounded on Mark's door until he finally answered, clearly annoyed at being woken up from what looked like a deep sleep. When we breathlessly told him what had happened in the attic, his initial reaction was disbelief. But the genuine terror in our eyes must have convinced him. He reluctantly grabbed a well-worn baseball bat from beside his bed and followed us back up the creaking stairs to the attic. The small door was fully closed again, the white paint blending seamlessly with the ceiling. "You guys are totally imagining things," Mark said, rolling his eyes, but he still agreed to check it out, a flicker of something unreadable in his own eyes. He dragged over a wobbly old chair, climbed up, and with a grunt, pushed open the small door, pointing the flashlight from his phone into the dark opening. His expression changed instantly. The skepticism vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief and dawning horror. He jumped down from the chair, grabbed us both roughly by the arms, and hurried us back downstairs, practically dragging us. "We're leaving. Now," he said, his voice low and urgent as he snatched his car keys from the kitchen counter. It wasn't until we were safely ensconced at our grandparents' house, the familiar scent of their baking and the sound of their gentle snoring a comforting balm to frayed nerves, that Mark finally explained what he'd seen. Scattered in the dusty crawl space, illuminated by his phone's beam, were several fresh cigarette butts, the kind Mark himself smoked. There were also crumpled food wrappers, the remnants of meals eaten recently, and a clearly defined makeshift bed fashioned from old blankets and cardboard. Someone had been living there, hidden above us, possibly for weeks. The police later found evidence that an unknown person had been entering and exiting the house through a damaged section of the roof, concealed by loose shingles. They never caught whoever it was, but Danny's parents found small, personal items missing from around the house, a favorite old watch, a silver lighter, and discovered that someone had been quietly taking showers in their bathroom and helping themselves to food from their refrigerator while they were at work. The attic became strictly off-limits after that, the door permanently locked. Danny never told me, but I heard from other friends who lived nearby that they sometimes still heard faint, unsettling footsteps on the roof at night, a persistent reminder of the unseen presence that had once lurked just above their heads. Story 5. Scott's parents had the kind of house that looked like it belonged in a magazine, a sprawling ranch-style home with manicured lawns and, most importantly for us, a sparkling blue pool in the backyard. When he invited me and 2 other guys, Liam and Ben, over for a sleepover during summer break, we were beyond stoked. The summer heat was relentless, and the promise of endless swimming was irresistible. We spent most of the evening in the pool, splashing and laughing, only reluctantly coming inside when Scott's mom called out that it was getting late, her voice echoing through the warm night air. Scott's parents, always early risers, went to bed around 10:30, leaving us to the muted glow of the TV as we played video games in the cool, carpeted basement. Around midnight, the allure of the water proved too strong. Scott, with a mischievous glint in his eye, suggested we sneak back out for a night swim. His parents were heavy sleepers, he assured us, and wouldn't hear a thing if we were quiet. The idea of the cool water under the moonlight sounded incredibly appealing, so we grabbed our still damp swim trunks and crept silently up the stairs and out the sliding glass door. The pool was even more inviting under the cloak of night. The underwater lights cast an eerie, almost ethereal blue glow across the water, illuminating the rippling surface and the dark depths. We slipped into the cool water with soft splashes, keeping our voices low as we horsed around, enjoying the illicit thrill of being out so late. The air was still and warm, carrying the faint scent of chlorine and night-blooming jasmine from the nearby bushes. That's when I noticed something odd floating near the deep end. At first, in the dim blue light, I thought it was just one of Scott's little brother's forgotten pool toys, a brightly colored inflatable ring. But as I swam closer, the shape became clearer, and I realized it was a backpack, a dark, nondescript backpack that I didn't recognize. "Hey, whose bag is this?" I called out softly, treading water and holding it up. The nylon felt slightly damp to the touch. Everyone stopped their splashing and looked over. Liam and Ben shook their heads. It definitely wasn't theirs, and Scott frowned, equally puzzled. Suddenly, a loud rustling sound came from the thick bushes along the far fence, the leaves shaking violently. A bright beam of a flashlight swept across the manicured lawn, momentarily blinding us. A gruff, unfamiliar voice cut through the night air. "Who's there? What are you doing?" It definitely wasn't Scott's dad's voice. A cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. We scrambled out of the pool, the wet tiles cold under our bare feet, as a tall, broad-shouldered man emerged from the shadows of the bushes. He was wearing a dark uniform with a patch on the shoulder that glinted in the flashlight beam, and a security badge clipped to his chest. He trained the powerful beam on each of our faces in turn, his expression stern. "What are you boys doing out here at this hour?" he demanded, his voice firm and authoritative. Scott, trying to sound confident despite the tremor in his voice, stepped forward, dripping water onto the patio. "We live here, sir. This is my house." The security guard looked confused, his brow furrowing under the brim of his cap. "This is the Hendersons' property. They're away on vacation." A chill ran through me that had absolutely nothing to do with the cool night air. Scott's last name wasn't Henderson. My heart started to pound in my chest. "No, you've got it wrong," Scott insisted, his voice now wavering slightly. "This is 478 Maple Drive, the Marshall residence." The guard slowly shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "Son, this is 476 Maple. The Hendersons are away on vacation and I'm here checking on the property." We looked around in growing horror, our eyes finally adjusting to the darkness beyond the blue pool lights, and we started to notice the subtle but significant differences. The sleek, modern patio furniture wasn't right. The sliding glass door had a different handle. Even the layout of the yard felt slightly off, and the basement we'd just come from, with its worn carpet and specific arrangement of the video game consoles, had a layout nothing like this house. In our excitement to go for a night swim, fueled by adrenaline and the hazy darkness, and with only the eerie blue glow of the underwater lights illuminating the backyard, we'd hopped the wrong fence. We'd trespassed onto our neighbor's property and had been swimming in their pool. The backpack, we later learned, after the bewildered security guard contacted the police, belonged to another teenager from the neighborhood who'd been doing the same thing, taking advantage of the empty house to use the pool while the owners were away. The security guard had been hired specifically to check on the property multiple times a night while the Hendersons were on their cruise. Scott's parents were furious, and the Hendersons, when they returned from their vacation, were understandably upset and nearly pressed charges. What terrified me most, though, wasn't the grounding or the potential legal trouble. It was the sudden, sickening realization of how easily we'd become the trespassers, the intruders. How quickly we went from innocent kids at a sleepover to potential criminals, all because of one simple, impulsive mistake in the dark. The thought that we could have been mistaken for something much worse, and the potential consequences that could have followed, still sends a shiver down my spine whenever I think about that night.